Welcome to Universe Unveiled, the podcast where we explore the mysteries that challenge our understanding of history and the universe. I'm Sarah.
And I'm Jacqueline. Today we have a very special guest, Miss Heather L. Arnold, author of The Island of the Giants, The Lost Race of Giants of Aruba, Curaçao, and Bonaire, which explores ancient giant remains, elongated skulls, and suppressed history on the Caribbean islands. Welcome, Heather. First, though, I'd also like to introduce Jason, shaman. um,
Um,
we thought that Jason would have a lot of things in common with some of the research that Heather does, so we invited him on. He's also one of the members of our UU crew, so always good to have a buddy aboard. Ja
Yeah, they've learned about the scruffy face. So Shaman 711, they know where to find me. YouTube, X, that screen name. Yeah, I'm really delighted to be here. I've followed Heather's work. She's sort of followed mine, and there's some places where it naturally overlaps. So I'm just excited to learn more about her work and just see what comes of this. And I'm grateful to be here, guys. Thank you.
Yeah, this is a fascinating topic. I've watched Heather for, the last 6 months, and then she visited our friends over at Occult Rejects, and I thought, I definitely wanna talk to her. So, Heather, we're really thrilled to have you here and really excited to hear about all the research that you do, and I know that you put a lot of time, effort, and energy into it, so I'm excited to hear your story. So, why don't you let everyone know who you are and what you do?
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for that lovely introduction. It's so great to be on with all of you. Um, yeah, so my name is Heather Arnold. I've been researching the giants of the Caribbean, particularly with regarding Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao for about now, it's going on maybe 17, 18 years.
Mm,
I
wow.
first became knowledgeable of the giants here when I had a tour company that I owned. When I say here, I'm based on the island of Aruba. That's where I live full time. Aruba, by the way, is 16 miles off the coast, northern coast of Venezuela. Um, so when I was putting together my tour company, I wanted to have historically accurate tours. And it was increasingly difficult to piece together the history of these islands, simply because what the children, for example, are taught in school is entirely um, baseless. For example, the islands were called the useless islands, and then I realized, wow, that's very strange. You know, why would they be called the useless islands? There's gold here. There's semi-precious stones, crystals, so many important things for a society, so many wealths of the islands, that I was thinking, now there's got to be some sort of cover up. And I soon discovered the story of Vespucci, Amerigo Vespucci, who arrived here in 1499. And I was reading his notes on his trip here, and the letters that he wrote about the time that he spent in Aruba, and how he named these islands at that time just Aruba and Curacao, because that's all that was known of that at that time. He named them the Islands of the Giants.
hmm,
And it was from that moment forward that I realized, this is it. This is why there's a cover up. You know, whenever there's giants, there's some sort of cover up. And so
Right.
I really began to delve into it, and more and more and more evidence came out to me. And through archaeological, everything I report on is from the archaeological record. I have acquired over 100, maybe 150 archaeological reports,
mm,
of all of my own expense, my own effort, my own time, to piece together the story of the giants on these three islands. So when I say three islands, I'm talking about the ABC Islands, Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao, which were at one point, one island in and of itself, and then became divided by a series of three mega tsunamis, which we could go into later. But so that was how I really began to delve into the giants, and then based off of the archaeological record, and also talking to locals about local folklore, things that they had heard in their family, stories that were passed down, and that coupled with the megaliths and the
mm.
monoliths that exist, particularly in Aruba. I just knew that there was something there. And from that moment, I always say I didn't find the giants found me. And so I think I'm the only person on earth that's been researching this, talking about it, and never shutting up about it, debating about it, and really just trying to show everybody, as many people as possible, the amazing history of these islands. And it's not just the history of for the Aruban people or the people of Curaçao or the people of Bonaire. It's also our story. It's part of our history. And
Yeah.
that's what I wish to convey. And so I'm so thankful that you are having me on today so that like, this story can get out to even more people.
Yeah. Wow. 18 years. That's good. Um,
That's impressive.
yeah. So after you read that story and found out that the place was named the island or the islands of the giants, where did you go from there? Like what were you I can imagine just probably you were feeling insatiable and just started looking everywhere. And coupled with the fact that you have a tour company, do you still operate a tour company?
I do. It's
Yeah,
called Ancient Aruba Tours. So, as a matter of fact, I've had some listeners from the former podcasts I've done with your colleagues come and do tours with me. So they heard me
amazing.
on your shows. So thank you very much, and I appreciate it. Yes. So I had a tour company at that time in the past. That tour company was I had 6 Harley-Davidsons and I had 2 Jeeps. So I did private Jeep tours and Harley Davidson rentals and tours. But that was when I was younger. I didn't have a daughter. That was a whole different
Right.
world, and then, I grew up and had responsibilities. So now I'm focused on ancient Aruba. It sounds actually more fitting. So I'm just basically focused on taking people on tours of these giant megalithic sites, petroglyph sites, astronomical sites involving dolmen, etc. And I can tailor it to anyone's needs. So that's essentially what I'm doing now. And this is something I couldn't have done in the past because I didn't know all this information. And now,
Right.
after all these years accumulating all this information, now I'm actually able to present it in a cohesive manner that makes sense. And really taking people to sites that I always tell them when you get on the plane to go home, you're going to be the only people on this plane who have been to these sites. So I take them to the largest burial ground in the Caribbean. It's called Malmuck Cemetery. It is underwater most of the year. There's only about 2 months where it is dry. So if a client can come during those 2 months, we can walk out into the cemetery, still see burials intact, including shell-midden burials, and it's pretty amazing. But so after I stumbled across Vespucci's writings, which are quite vivid and quite animated, I that it really drew me in
Hmm.
actually, because Vespucci, people think of him, in a negative sense now because of the climate of
Right.
the world at this moment, but in reality, he felt like he was going to be not only an explorer, but he was going to convey the story to the world about what he was coming across. And so he brought a lot of experts on those ships with him, people involved with flora, fauna, scientists of various natures, people who were involved with what would be considered early anthropological research, for example. And so he was writing down and documenting everything he was seeing across his travels. He had just been, I believe, I don't know, but I believe over the islands off of the coast of Venezuela, right before he had come to Aruba. And he had seen a human on a spit being turned around and eaten by the people there. And he had just seen that the day before, but his interaction with the giants was one that caused him so much fear and panic that he said he felt he was going to die that day, that when he interacted with the giants. So that was very intriguing to me because he was more fearful of these giant statured humans than of people eating a human. So it immediately drew me in. And what happened was Columbus actually was the one who knew that there were giants in Aruba, particularly.
Hmm.
And so Columbus went back after his last journey to the New World, and he reported that his next trip wanted to be to Aruba because he heard there was gold. And
Mm.
obviously, these guys were after treasure as well. So he had learned this because he had developed a close relationship with the mainland South Americans in what would be now Venezuela. So because he had this close and trusting relationship, they were the ones who confided in him that across the way, and you can see Venezuela from here, and from Venezuela you can see Aruba,
It's
and
that
they
close,
pointed.
eh?
Yes, it's
Okay.
16 miles. Yes, as a matter of fact, we've heard the explosions from from what's going on in our waters.
Wow.
Shook our island. So yeah, so I've got bags ready to go in case I have to leave at any moment, to be honest. So
I would
that's
too,
Mhm.
definitely.
another thing. But it's so beautiful here. Kind of just put it out of your head and focus on the giants. So then so when he went back to Europe, Columbus, he said, okay, next time I want to go to Aruba. The people on the mainland in Venezuela, the tribes, they told him, yes, there's gold there, and they're very tall people, they're giants, and they're generally peaceful people, but if you interfere with them, they will get violent. So when Columbus went back to Europe and tried to he had the only permit to sail to the New World. And what happened was Vespucci kind of snuck his way in through the Medicis and married a Medici daughter, and he became the accountant, and he cooked the books, making it look like Columbus was embezzling money from the Medicis. And so then Vespucci got the permit. So then
Mhm.
Vespucci was dying to go back to what is now Aruba, and see the gold. I mean, this was one of the first things he did once he got to the mainland of South America. And so he talks about how he took his ships over with actually one ship over with men on board, and they got to the beach, and I know exactly where the giants entered as well. I mean, the Vespucci entered and interacted with the giants. It's actually the first settlement of the giants on the island, a very, very old part of the island, and filled with gold to this day, filled with gold. So they came in and saw these footprints in the sand, and they were giant footprints, and he immediately knew they had to follow the footprints, and they did. And they
Right.
came across these women, and they were in a village, and they were so tall. He marveled at how tall they were, particularly the daughters, who were teenagers and towered over these men. And at first they were kind of a little frightened, but they were obviously curious, and even began to contemplate stealing the two girls to bring them back on the ship, to bring them back to Europe as trophies. And so as they're coming up with this scheme, 36 men entered, and they were even bigger than the women. He describes what they look like, their appearance. They were carrying weapons. He describes the weapons. He was even thinking to himself, like, how would I even lift these weapons? What would these weapons even for? Completely astounded at the size and what they looked like, and what were they doing with them. And the men started to get angry that these men were there. There was a breakdown of communication, and Vespucci aborts mission on trying to kidnap the girls, and quickly they retreat back to the ship. And the scary part is he details how the giants kept in step. Even when they went on the ship and the ship is pulling away, the giants are so tall, they're walking in the water and
Mm.
still shooting arrows at the ship. And Vespucci begins to panic and suggests that they fire off a cannon to push the giants back. And it literally was the only thing that was able to cause the giants to retreat. And Vespucci writes, I thought I was going to die that day.
Mm.
And then said, I named these islands the islands of the giants due to the people of giant stature there. And that name stuck going into the late 1700s. And Venezuela what is now Venezuela in Caracas, was the seat of the leadership of this area, of this territory. And noted in this territorial, I guess, declaration, is that there is jurisdiction over the islands of the giants. And eventually, Aruba became Aruba, the name Aruba, because it's a kind of play on the Spanish gold there is, meaning there's
Mhm.
gold here. Bonaire became Bonaire, and Curaçao retained the name the Island of the Giants until the late 1700s, when it then became Curaçao. So once I heard about that, then I found out that there was a map that showed the islands of the Giants. This map is now located in Spain. It's from 1502. It was made by cartographer Juan de la Cosa, and he noted on the map the islands of the Giants. And you can see the island of Aruba and the island of Curacao. I actually took that map to a cartographer who's also based in Europe, in Belgium, and he writes thesis papers. He's one of the top cartographers in the world. He's very into ancient old maps and determining their accuracy. And he's determined that the location of where the island was of Aruba, the island of the Giants, on the 1502 map, was the most accurate part of the entire map. So that the latitude and longitude was almost perfect. So that proved to me that they were definitely talking about Aruba, and then obviously our sister island right next to us, Curacao. And so once you start to get the facts down, and that's really what I wanted to base everything off of, the facts and science and this knowledge, as well as, of course, firsthand accounts or, folklore, historical stories passed down in families, etc. Then you start, it's almost like it just keeps presenting itself to you. Then you find an archaeological report, then you find, all these references to, for example, the Quest for Giants, which is the most famous archaeological report on the giant skeletons unearthed at the Malmuck Cemetery. Then you find out that there were skulls on display, and it goes on and on. And
Hmm.
so and that was really the beginning of this journey, this long winding journey with the Giants, who now I think they just keep, showing me different things, quite frankly. It's once you're in tune, it's really interesting how it keeps presenting itself. And every day when I think I've learned as much as I could and unraveled as much as I could possibly do so with regard to the Giants, then something else will come up. And that I find most intriguing, because it also lends to the complexity of what was going on thousands of years ago.
Hmm.
What do we
And
theorize?
Sorry,
did
Sarah.
I'm sorry.
Vespucci, real quick, may I ask a quick question? Vespucci, in all the descriptions, did he provide any measurements? Do you know what I mean? Was there any technical
Hmm.
description other than they were just a lot taller?
Well, he doesn't, but he does say that if if they were kneeling, they still would have been taller than him standing. So people will say, oh, well, back in the day, Europeans were small. They were all short. That's a very famous thing. But I have found a report. So my quest was then, how tall was Vespucci? Right. So I found a report saying that he was 6 feet tall. So
Wow.
like 181 meters. So that would be centimeters. So that would be about maybe
Mhm.
6'1", about.
Yeah.
So if that is the case, and if that is true, then they were rather tall. I mean, at least probably 8 feet tall, I would assume. He also goes on to explain their physical stature, not just their height, but what they look like. They were robust people. They were wide. He thought they were well proportioned, which is a very interesting description that we
Eh,
hear about giants, that they were well
Yep,
proportioned. So
yep.
there was no acromegaly going on. These were
Right.
actual, right. Yes, right.
That they use the same words about
Yes,
what they encountered in Southeast United States. Well
exactly. Well
proportioned. Yeah, over
proportioned,
and over
yes.
again. Yep.
So, and so these weren't like spindly, like
Mm.
NBA players, these were, I mean, very large people, not just in height, but in width, in girth. I mean, just giant people in every aspect. As a matter of fact, in the archaeological reports of a cave system excavation, a cave that I stare at every day out my window, they found a giant skeletons. And when the archaeologists tried to cut through the bone with an human cadaver saw, he was unable to do so and kept breaking the blade. They
Wow.
had to actually devise their own saw to get through these giant bones. So that's how robust and strong these bones still remain. Now, the more ancient bones disintegrated. They couldn't even get them out of the earth. But the ones they were able to get out of the earth were very difficult to cut, and as a matter of fact, impossible to do so with a cadaver saw. So, also a lot of the giants still have their teeth. When we find their skulls, they still have all their teeth, which is very interesting. I find so. I believe in general these were very healthy people, and so although Vespucci doesn't give measurements, such as, for example, I tried to figure out from his measurements if he was actually came to Aruba, because when you hear about giants, you can't just take the whole story. You have to, was it really Aruba?
Sure.
What was it? You have to look at every single aspect of it, because you have to build this story that is solid, because you're going to be challenged all the time. So I figured out through his calculations and with the cartographer of ancient maps that yes, indeed, he was in Aruba. It was the island of the giants, and Vespucci was at least 6 feet 1 inch, so which would make the giants probably about 8 feet or more.
And see, that fits. That was why I was asking. The Spaniards did give a measurement. It was a vara, right? A half a vara. So they're saying roughly what we might consider a yard was a vara, right? So they're saying 1.5 to 2 feet right there, taller than the tallest Spaniard, who might have been what, maybe 6 feet, right? So
Right,
I
exactly.
think we're sort of landing. And like you said, this well proportioned, what I think they were trying to get across to us is because the rest of the world, right, back home would have been familiar with a gigantism or some sort of morphed something, whereas these creatures they were seeing all qualities of the human beings aggregated, right? So it just grew with them. The eyeballs size of oxen, and then as you were saying, the bone density, right, to support this, everything aggregated, the strength, the muscular mass, all the qualities, and that's why I think they're saying well proportioned, is so we understood. No, these are just big, huge people, right? Everything bigger.
Yes.
That's great. Thank you.
I
Yes.
agree. But the interesting thing about these giants as well was that their skulls are elongated. So
Mm.
the cranial elongation is something of an intriguing aspect. It lends to itself the fact that the brain was larger. It also creates anatomical differences because of where the skull had to attach to the neck. So because the skulls of the giants the elongation went up and then back, not
Okay.
straight up, like, for example, with the Paracas skulls. So, because of this, the weight of the brain was predominantly in the back of the head. And so where the neck attaches to the skull is further back than where it does for modern humans.
Right, it would change the
Also,
articulation or even change the number of bones in the neck.
exactly, and the
Yeah.
and the neck had to be very strong as well
Mhm.
to hold that weight up. The jaw, where the jaw is attached to the skull, is in a different location. It's wider, and that's why a lot of people say we could put the whole skull on top of our head. If you read some of these the whole jaw, the bottom jaw and the top over our head. If you read these older reports in the newspapers, et cetera, in the 1800s, when they come across these giant bones, and then the whoever finds them says how big the jaw was. Well, that's why, because it was attaching differently to the skull, where the ears were, and even the eye sockets. These giants had large eyes, and they
Sure.
were the first thing every archaeologist says when they see, for example, the Bonaire skeleton, which is on display in Bonaire, which is of a giant. They say how big the eye sockets were. So these people were large and just as Jason says, in every aspect. And that what that well proportion, I agree, means, because that's exactly how they were presented, as just absolute giants in every sense.
Now, what happened to the two? Didn't you say there were two skulls that you were trying to track down? Whatever happened with that?
Uh, yes. So I was just in Curacao. So that was last week. I was there for 4 days. And I tried to get access to them again and was denied access, was told that they weren't even sure if they had them. They no longer at the Archaeology Museum, except they used to allow you to make an appointment. You could go see some of the artifacts. They no longer do that. So it's been very challenging because these two skulls were on display. They were unearthed at the Malmuck Cemetery. There have been archaeological reports done on them. They were on display at the Curaçao Museum, and then they disappeared, as these things tend to do. The last known location was the Curaçao Museum. They were written about within the newspaper in 1980. The Reading Eagle, which is a paper still in circulation in Reading, Pennsylvania. And a journalist had gone to Curaçao, went to the Curaçao Museum and saw these skulls and actually wrote about them in the newspaper article. And the description was, these are skulls of a giant race of people who used to live in Aruba, Bonaire, and Curaçao. So then the museum undergoes a renovation. And also it's, just to give context, Aruba, Bonaire, and Curaçao are part of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. So everyone here has a Dutch passport, and Holland is very much still in control of these islands. And so Holland basically came in, did a renovation. The skulls are now gone. I'm assuming they went to the Archaeology Museum, which is called the Memory Management Museum. I'm not even kidding. That's what the Archaeology Museum is called. Yes, it's very,
Saying
very
the quiet part out loud.
Unreal.
Yeah, exactly.
The Ministry of
Right,
Truth.
open. Yeah. So the Memory Management Museum, aka the Archaeology Museum, are the ones that I think are housing these bones at this moment. So I still have not. My whole goal is to get them repatriated to Aruba, where they are from, and maybe put on display, or at least if they're not put on display, at least have them publicly talked about, and maybe articles written about them, etc. Especially because one of them has its hand fused to its face, and it was the measurements done of that hand by an anthropologist who was the head of the Tropical Museum in Amsterdam. Those measurements, actually, she said it was the largest hand she had ever seen. And she compared them to Native Americans in Florida, who at that time were the largest people she had ever known of. And she writes a whole report on that. And so that's also interesting too, to see this hand. The skulls, she had some measurements, but the hand was where she really realized that she could figure out how large these people were. And she determined that they were giants for sure. And that the one she was studying was at least 8 feet tall. She actually had suggested to do some carbon-14 dating of the skulls. And she left Curaçao and got on a plane to go to Peru, and her plane crashed and she died. So we have no more research has been done as far as I know on these skulls, and right now no one even knows where the skulls are. So it's very upsetting, but typical. It's kind of
So just for clarification, the Memory Management Museum, that's in the Netherlands.
That's in Curaçao.
Oh, it's in
So
Curaçao.
Aruba,
Okay.
yes. So just to give you an idea of what's going on. So here in Aruba, we have an archaeology museum. The head of archaeology is my ex-boyfriend, actually. So we didn't get along well. It sounded romantic at first, and then the reality sunk in. We didn't agree about anything. So but he actually gives me a lot of information.
Okay.
And he gives me this information because he tells me, because of who he is, he cannot speak of what I'm speaking of. He tells me, no, there were giants.
Gotcha.
We have giant bones. A lot of them are stolen. I mean, a lot of the information he gives, and I give him information, and he uses it in his lectures and his papers, and he doesn't credit me. So that's a whole different thing.
That's an X.
It's interesting how he uses my information. So, but of course not about the giants. but he does about the monoliths and the megaliths, which is
Mhm.
actually quite interesting. So,
He was managing his own memory of where
yeah,
he got that information
yes,
from, you know?
Yep.
exactly, exactly. So that museum here in Aruba is a sister museum to the Smithsonian. So the
Okay.
Smithsonian in
I was waiting for
Washington,
that to get dropped into the
yes,
conversation.
yeah, so they help finance and put together the museum here in Aruba. It's actually in a historic buildings from the 1600s, and they restored it and it made it quite a lovely architectural museum. But the skulls that were there was a giant skull on display there, as well as two other skulls. They've been taken out of
Hmm.
the exhibition due to insensitivities, and they've been replaced by crappy art, as I like to put it, which is a growing trend. So that Smithsonian has financed the museum here. The Memory Management Museum is controlled by the Netherlands. So
Okay.
that is a totally Dutch entity, completely under the control of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. So you can see already where there's going to be these controversies and this frustration in trying to get the actual information out, because that's total control of the narrative, as far as I'm concerned.
Yep.
Definitely. And it's
Yep.
they likely collaborate in a lot of ways and run cover for each other too. So I
Yes,
would
Well,
and
think.
yeah, and they profit off of all of this, guys. I mean, the Smithsonian does a lot, but my first question to you when you started this, you answered, but it was, are you sure the skulls are even there? Because once you start talking about this level of antiquity, I'm past the point of believing that the Smithsonian is into preserving anything. People say, I want to audit it. I want to go in the basement. This day and age, I'm beginning to believe all you'll find is all the damn cash they got from privatizing all of this stuff.
Makes you
You
wonder,
know,
right? Definitely makes you wonder.
it does. When you start thinking of the amount of money and the look at all of us and what we would do just for the chance, right? I think I found where one is buried, I mean, I'm excited about this, right? It's a rare thing, but
Mhm.
how much money is that worth on the black market, guys?
Mm.
It's worth a lot. You saw it in Peru, right? What happened with all those elongated skulls? Dan Richards was telling us about this. They opened 62 bags and they document what they got out of 3 bags, and that's the end of the notes. And
Yeah.
so what does that mean? That means what they got out of 80 bags got sold because the money was hand over fist.
Yeah.
Rockefeller, all of these founding American guys that were in there with the Smithsonian. Anyway, I'm off my soapbox, but I bet we have no idea where it is unless we can trace the money they received.
Good luck.
well, we do have one skeleton here, and I try to check on it as much as I can.
Mm.
It's in Bonaire. It's in the Bonaire Museum. It
Okay.
is run by the government. And Bonaire is 100% under the Kingdom of the Netherlands.
Mhm.
So the kingdom completely controls Bonaire. And so the head of that museum is a government official. And I went with him because I was given an offer to get a piece of the bone sample to DNA test it in a private independent laboratory. So I was given a budget of $5,000. I could offer $5,000 to get a piece of this bone. So I went to the museum, and this was in 2024, and I met with the government official of the museum, and he said, I said, look, I'm willing to pay $5,000. I think it's important. We have an independent study.
Mhm.
And he said unequivocally that this is a giant. Now, in 1980, an entire archaeological report was written up of this skeleton. It's the most complete, archaic giant skeleton found in the ABC Islands, and it is crumpled in a corner in a box. It's just, I mean, and of course it's not laying outright, because then you would see how giant it is, and its skull is elongated. It's very, very cool, and also very sad.
You did lay eyes on it though.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. So I have seen it now. The first time I saw it was, I believe, 2018,
Okay.
and then I saw it again in 2024.
Okay.
So I intend on going back and always checking up on it. It is government property at this
Mhm.
point, and or kingdom property, so anything is possible. So when so the government official said unequivocally it is of a giant, but he said, I can't let you take any bone fragment because so many people have just taken bone samples from the skeleton. So
Just.
I was shocked because this skeleton was found in the late 1970s by accident, of course,
Mm,
when there was construction going on for a bus stop. So they uncovered the skeleton. They knew right away something was wrong because and I read the newspaper article. I understand the local language, so I'm able to read it because a lot of times even translations fall apart, or when they translate to English, they leave stuff out. So thankfully, that's
mm.
why I learned the language so I wouldn't be duped, which sometimes still happens, but it's still, at least I can read it. And it's discussed how right away the workmen were like, no, 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 this is not normal because it was a giant. They saw right away it was a giant. So
Right.
they called in the archaeologist, and this is now the skeleton. So that was in the late 1970s. The archaeological report called the Bonaire skeleton, which unequivocally shows and concludes that this was a giant skeleton, was it done in 1980. So after all this time now, in 2024, these people have come to take bone samples. So I said, who came? So one of them is his name is Jay Havasier. He is a local archaeologist from the States, actually, but based out of St. Martin. So, okay, that makes sense. But of course, we'll probably never, ever, ever see the evidence of what he came up with from that DNA testing. And the second group were people from two Italians that perhaps were from the Vatican, and they wanted the bone sample to test for themselves. So this is the second time the Vatican has come up with these giants, because the first was a story I came upon from 1528 of a monk that was based out of Grenada, a European monk, but based out of Grenada. And he heard the stories of the giants. And so he came to Aruba and was presented with a giant femur. And he wanted to send this femur to the Vatican. So he put it on a ship going toward the Vatican to Europe, and it never made it to the Vatican. So the Vatican allegedly has no record of the femur. So again, it's kind of interesting that Italy and the Vatican is coming up again. And so he said that they took a sample, and he said, so now I don't want to give out any more samples. So I said, well, the reason why it's important is because you need to have an independent researcher, because I promise you, we are never going to see the results of that DNA testing from this giant. And to this day, we
Right.
have no results. I can't find anything, no reports, nothing on the results of the DNA testing of the Bonaire skeleton. But it is still a giant skeleton, and as far as I know, it is the original skeleton. So, and if bone samples or fragments are being taken from it, it's for DNA testing. I'm assuming it's so. But the sad part is, I'm still looking for and trying to contact people to see if there are any results that I can see. But so far, I have heard nothing. So, which is sad and
Not
frustrating.
frustrating, but not surprising.
Exactly. I
Not at all.
expected as much. I expected
Yeah,
as much.
absolutely. I can't help but draw likeness between the behavior of institutions like the Vatican and the Smithsonian. They like to collect things for themselves. Yeah.
It's
Exactly.
like any large institution, right? I mean, can you imagine? Look, if I'm a Catholic priest somewhere and I realize that instead of being stuck in the liturgy and with everything that's horrible and choir boys, I could be out
You
there
can be a
searching the world for giant
missionary.
bones. You're going to go do it, right? And if you're coalescing power anywhere, whether you're Nazis, the Catholics, the Smithsonian, anywhere you're coalescing power, you're going to
Mhm.
coalesce secrets, because secrets equal power. That's
Absolutely.
simply the way it is.
Mm,
So, yeah, the Vatican pops up everywhere. It had nothing to do with God. It had to do with coalescing power.
yeah.
I
Sending out your
agree.
Anywhere they get to do
representative
that, they're gonna keep it. They're gonna keep it secret. If you can make money or get power out of it, or both preferably, that's what's gonna happen.
for sure.
I
For sure.
agree.
Strange.
Well, I love the thought that you have laid eyeballs on that Bonaire skeleton. I'm
Yes,
glad.
me too.
I'm glad for sure.
Yes, thank God. And I hope it's safe. I have video, I have photos, so I have contact with the this is an interesting caveat. So the head of the museum is a government official, and he was a Bonairean. and he told me that he would probably not be receiving the DNA report because he was retiring. So I said, "Oh, okay. Who's going to be taking your place?" And he said, "I'm arguing with the government because they want to put someone in here who's from China." I'm
Oh,
like, "Wait,
no.
what?"
No.
Yes. So I don't know
No.
who the head is now, and I have to circle back and
Mhm.
contact him and see who they put in. But I was like, why would they put someone from China, unless they had some, I
Yeah.
don't know, nefarious,
It's some sort
um
of weird vested interest.
Yes,
Yes.
exactly. So I thought it was so strange, and he was arguing because he was part of appointing who was going to succeed him, and
Mhm.
he said, "I've been arguing because I want a Bonairean in charge of
Sure.
the Bonaire Museum, not someone from China." So I really, really, really hope the Bonaire skeleton is fine, I'm hopeful to go back and check on him again. Again, it was determined to be a male, by the way. So, but that is still, even so, the largest. I went to a cave system in Curaçao where the largest skull of a giant was ever unearthed. And I actually have that archaeological report as well. And at first, the remains were determined to be female.
Okay.
And the measurements of the skull were enormous. I mean, the skull was almost 3 feet long, according to the
Wow.
measurements of the
Wow.
researcher. And then, in consequential archaeological reports, the researchers changed the numbers of the size of the skull and the sex of the skeleton. So then they say, no, it was a male,
Mm.
and that the researcher who took the original measurements must have been incorrect. So we corrected them based off of what we think the skull would have been. So at this point, they haven't even seen the skull. So the original researchers saw the skull, and I have it all documented. I see the archaeological report where they actually said they're questioning the validity of the measurements. And even though they don't even have the physical skull or skeletal remains in their possession,
Mhm.
they are assuming he was wrong. So they that in and of itself, in writing, have changed the narrative. So this was, and I propose that the giants were a matriarchal society, which would explain a predominant, very elite burial of this
Of
skeleton. And
women, yeah.
yeah, exactly, because she was a central burial, and she was, and a lot of the central burials, if not most of them, involving the giants on the three islands, are of females. So they are the central burial, and then everyone else is around them. So it was interesting to see this investigator change the numbers,
Mhm.
change the sex of the skeleton, and just totally embarrass the original
Original.
investigator who actually saw and took the measurements of the skull and the skeleton. And to see it happening right before your eyes, there's no question there's a narrative control, and
Sure,
it's
there's two facets of narrative to control there: to admit that there are giants, first and foremost, right? And also to diminish the idea of a matriarchal society. You see that
That
over and
part
over and
is
over again,
interesting.
and
exactly
also, just biologically speaking, we often equate, male female. When you have a female that is X size, you could, probably assume that the male counterparts are even larger. So it's
exactly
a way to diminish the idea that that these were giant people at all. Like admitting that this specimen is specifically a female is
exactly
saying that,
good
what, the
point.
males were even larger. Because
Right.
that's something that I would
Right.
automatically assume if I was reading that information. My gosh, if this is a female, then imagine the size of a male. you
Right.
know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
excellent point.
Yeah.
Yeah,
On
and
its face, matriarchy makes sense, I mean, if these things existed, if they were this big, right? They survived from, I'm assuming your research shows too, cataclysm, right? So that
Mhm.
sometime before then they thrived, right? So at this point, what are they? You read about the Navajos, right? They talk about the giants they ended up having to kill in the caves because the giants would harass them occasionally, trying to take food, right? So
Mm.
these things became hunted. They became hunted by all the humans that were now starting to surge back and succeed upon the planet. So where might they end up? On an island, first and foremost, and who might end up there before the men who are hunted and ravaged? The women. Send the women away. The mothers want to, escape to save the lineage, right? The men are being hunted. I think it all makes sense, just in your head and from an objective standpoint. That's
Mhm.
all.
Yes,
Mhm.
Yeah.
and they're all, I always say, in my presentations that I've given, I always say, what do giants love? What do you look for if you're looking for giants? And one of them is water, one of them is megaliths and monoliths, and the other are caves. The
Mhm.
giants loved caves and also, like you say, islands. I mean, a lot of Catalina Island. I mean, all these islands, Malta, all islands. I mean, you hear often about giants being on islands and more to the point in caves. So here in Aruba, we have an extensive cave system. In Bonaire, there are at least 500 caves. Only 200 have been explored. Some of them have now been submerged. And Curaçao has, I don't know how many caves, but less than Aruba and Bonaire. So, but still an extensive cave system. And a lot of these burials are in caves. I found a birthing chamber
Mhm.
here in Aruba in a cave. Their activity as shaman, their magic, whatever religion was going on, their spirituality occurred all in caves. Petroglyphs, pictographs are in caves.
Mm.
We see where they lived. We can see these ancient fossilized shells that they were eating from, their tools. So I think the island is a perfect and ideal setting, and also caves. I mean, these are islands
Mhm.
filled with caves, and those are things that giants love. And they were, I think, I mean, when you go to Chaco Canyon, which I think there were, I mean, the people of Chaco all had 6 fingers and 6 toes, so that
Right.
already sets them apart. And when you go there, I don't know if you've ever been. I've been there about 5 times now, thank God, because I feel so lucky to have just been there once. Um, you realize, wow, something was going on here. Like, this is really in the middle of nowhere. Like,
Mhm.
they have, like, lookout towers. I mean, these people were,
Mhm.
as Jason was saying, being hunted. I mean, that's the vibe you get.
Right.
These people were looking out for themselves on a daily basis. They were under siege of some sort. And that's kind of the feeling you get here with the giants as well. Because the giants eventually, what happened was, average statured people from the mainland of northern South America did eventually make it over here, but they were controlled by the giants. And we know that through the burials, because, for example, in the Malmuck Cemetery, the giants here were in love with isosceles triangles. They were obsessed with isosceles triangles, I would say. So all of their burials, and this is in the archaeological report, are in the shape of isosceles triangles. So the giants were at all of the angles. So there would be 3 giants in a supine position. And then the average statured people would form the lines to make that triangle. Another way that they were buried was in a circle. Like, so the archaeologists called it like spokes in a wheel. So the giant is a central burial in the supine position. And then all the average statured people with their heads facing the giants and their feet facing out
Wow.
Interesting.
are buried. And that occurs in the cave, actually, right across from me, where one of the also largest burials of a skeleton in Aruba was found. That was also believed the central burial to be a female. So you can tell that the giants had the prominence. And in these burials, specifically in caves, and even the older ones, for example, there is a cave system with only females.
Mm.
And they are female giants and teenage female girls, females giants also buried there, and they're buried with monkeys, which is really strange because
Wow.
Aruba doesn't have monkeys. So, and the monkeys and the giants are also given elite burial status. So, by that I mean not only the burial itself, the actual construction and the grave gifts, but because don't forget they had elongated skulls. So what happened was the back, their elongated portion of their skull, is dyed in a red ochre,
Okay.
and the ochre is determined to be from locally sourced manganese. So that's why I know for a fact there was a very complex ritual of death, particularly given the fact that the Malmuck Cemetery, where there's at least 72 burials that were unearthed, but there are more left in the ground. This place, remember, in the beginning, I told you how it's covered with water most of the time. So if you died in December, you couldn't be buried there. There's no way. So you would have to wait it out. So there must have been a place on this island, and that's what I'm searching for, where they would stack these bodies and leave them probably to predators to eat them till they became skeletal, and
Right.
then paint their skulls, because the ochre part, that when the manganese went on the skull, it was black. And it was because of the sand and the humidity that caused them to become red. So this was a very complex ritual of death. And when we see, for example, the monkeys had ochre on their heads. So they were also given this
Obviously,
ritual.
yeah, considered sacred in some way, shape, or form to the
I think it's
society.
because of the matriarch part, because I've been to India, and if you go to Curaçao and
Mm.
you see the reliefs on the temples of the Devadasis, and the Devadasis were females who had to be celibate, and the only male they could be around was the
Right.
priest. And the Devadasis, in some of these drawings, they're getting ready to perform, and they have trained monkeys holding pallets of makeup or holding their bells to put around their ankles. And these monkeys were their companions, were their helpers. They were
Right.
essentially part of the royal court. And then to see these female burials in this most difficult place to get to. I mean, these caves are so hard to get to. We have to send people out to make the trail. We have to use vines to swing. I mean, it's really like Indiana Jones style to
Wow.
get to these caves.
Nice.
And to know that females were buried there, and these monkeys, and
Yes.
it's a summer solstice marker as well. When the summer solstice sun rises, it illuminates the first and central burial, which is of a female in the supine position who is with a monkey.
I
So
wonder what genus of monkey and where they came from.
yes,
That would be
yeah,
interesting to know.
we do know that. So there
Okay.
was DNA testing done on the monkey. The monkey, it's not determined what the monkey is, because there's no DNA that's similar. The only
Okay.
one that they think it's similar to is the macaque. But did they look at every monkey, or did they just think, well, it's got to be from South America? Was
Mm.
there a monkey here that's now extinct? I mean, we didn't just find one monkey here. And, there are several monkeys, and they're in these burials. When you talk to the older people here on the island, they tell us about how in their day, when they would walk home from school, they knew not to walk past Monkey Rock because there were monkeys there. So they talk about this. There is a huge stone. It's my presentation. It's on the title page of Monkey Rock. There's a giant boulder in a rock formation called Io Rock Formation it's a entire face of a monkey. So I think that there were monkeys here, and now they're extinct,
Extinct.
or maybe they were traded and they got bred out, or whatever the term is, just kind of
Mm.
like what I think happened to the giants. Essentially, they were bred out. But yeah, so I think that, did they test all of the types of monkeys? I don't know. But I think it's kind of interesting, or because at first I thought it would be like a capuchin, but they didn't think it was a capuchin because it didn't match the DNA of a capuchin. So it's very, very strange. But they weren't large monkeys, but large enough that they could probably assist in basic tasks if they were trained to do so. So
Mhm.
it's quite interesting, and the
Just even for the
similarities to other
companionship.
cultures is
Yeah.
also, to know that in India, women were using monkeys, in a sacred space. And now here in Aruba, we're seeing some of the same thing. To me, it's just so fascinating.
It reminds
That's
me
what I
of
was thinking was the monkey god,
yeah.
Hanuman.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yes. And Hanuman, right? Exactly.
It
Yes.
reminds me of the cult of Isis and the priestesses who stayed in the temples, and they had pets. They had cats and
Right.
yeah.
Exactly.
because they were just
Yeah, I mean
amongst
that
each other.
and they were helpers. I mean,
Mhm.
especially with the monkeys. I mean, they were considered part of the royal court. I mean, these monkeys were given royal burials within
Mm.
the graves of these women up at this cave system here in Aruba. I mean, that took time and effort, and you can tell because there are other bones with these goddesses or these shaman or whatever they were considered. Uh, there were bird bones, there were small lizard bones, fish bones. There were small other little animals that we have. We had rabbits here, etc. But they were not covered in ochre. They were not. They were mostly given as a gift. You know, you
An
could tell they
offering.
were grave gifts exactly. But the monkey was part of the burial, and
Right.
what these gifts were also in part given to the monkey as well.
Hmm. Yeah, that's very interesting. Crazy.
Yes.
Throw in the geometry with you said that they liked isosceles triangles.
Yes.
Like, that's these aren't like cave dwelling,
Right.
Mm-mm.
sit in a cave and grunt. This is intelligence. That's intelligence.
I mean, they were
That's
using the
advanced.
Pythagorean theorem essentially maybe
Yeah,
Sure.
7,000 years ago. You know, that's
Sure.
crazy. Like, where did they get
yeah.
that from? You know, I
Yeah.
mean, why was it important? That's the other part of it. I mean, to think, I mean, we have these three places on the island. One is called Casabari Rock Formation. Then we have Io Rock Formation. And then we have Kanashito Caves, where the birthing chamber is. I connected all those and did research and found out it forms a perfect isosceles triangle. Um, Kasabari rock
That's
formation is exactly one half the height of Heuberg. Heuberg, and it looks at Heuberg. Heuberg is an extinct caldera that sits directly in the center of this island. It's made of a stone so rare that the stone is actually named after the mountain itself, and it's called Heubergite. It's filled with quartz.
Okay.
So the odds,
Quartz.
just yes,
Right.
exactly. The odds of this Kasabari rock formation and the Heuberg being, exactly one half the size of Heuberg is just astronomically, statistically,
Mm.
interesting, as well as the fact that if the fact that these three key geological features form an isosceles triangle, the statistical probability of that occurring in nature is 0.0001%. So on all their
yeah.
tools, they have isosceles triangles. Their
Yes.
burials are in isosceles triangles. It's just something very strange. And if you recognize patterns, and which when you're trying to piece together an ancient history and everything's working against you, you have to be good at pattern recognition. And if you look at these patterns of isosceles triangles coming up over and over again, what is going on? And that is, to me, the most intriguing fact. I mean, clearly, and the fact of the burials being in isosceles triangles is mentioned in the archaeological report. As a matter of fact, an entire archaeological presentation was done on the geometry
Mm.
of Aruba, particularly the ancient people in the archaic times and their obsession with isosceles triangles. So this is something that was recognized in the archaeological community as well.
One of the connections that I've heard, and I'd be interested in knowing what you have to say about it, and I have to do it, is that Aruba obviously is part of, the Antilles and its connection, or it's likened to, Atlantis, which I find highly fascinating and not likely to just be a coincidence. Have you done any research in that direction?
I have. Antilles actually means of Atlantis.
Mm.
So when the people from the explorers came over from Europe, they thought right away that these were the remnants. These islands scattered throughout were the remnants of Atlantis. And so there are some similarities in that, in the fact that, was Atlantis in this location? Some people think, look at the Bimini road, for example, is not far from here. Or
Mhm.
Cuba is not far from here.
Mhm.
So we are in the Atlantic Ocean. Okay, it's the Caribbean, but essentially it's the Atlantic Ocean. So you have to start to wonder about that, and I am often asked about that. I know it was believed by the explorers to have been part of Atlantis, so that's something I can say for sure. But whether or not it actually was, I don't know. But it's actually intriguing, and to see that things that are petroglyphs, for example,
Mhm.
another thing. The same petroglyphs that we have here, they have in Europe, they have in Africa, they have in South America. We have them in the desert Northwest, or they have them in Arizona. We have them in New Mexico. We have them in Canada. So when you see those similarities, you know that this was an ancient group of people who were one at one time, and at the very most, at the very least, they were communicating.
And seafaring
So
had to be
exactly.
100%.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes, there's no question. There's no question that they were seafaring, yes.
Mhm.
So, when you see this over and over, and you have to make these connections because it's essential to make the connections to tell the story. And
Mhm.
though I think archaeologists are sometimes isolationists, and they just see one aspect and they don't want to connect the
Mhm.
pieces, but that you must connect the pieces because that's
Yep.
the story. That's how you tell. That's how you can piece it together. You can't just say that, we were over here, they didn't do anything, they didn't leave. I mean, I saw petroglyphs here that I saw on Easter Island. I mean, how in Easter Island is literally in another place thought to have been inhabited by giants, of course, by
Mhm.
the way. And
Mhm.
so, and also statues. I mean, we have found statues here in the Caribbean that look like moai. I mean, exactly the same hand placement, the prominent
Yeah,
navel.
like the hands in the front, like
Yeah.
yeah,
Exactly.
with the
And
belly.
exactly. And
Yeah.
another interesting connection between Easter Island and these islands here in Aruba, Bonaire, and Curaçao. We have, so I don't know, I'm sure you're aware, in Easter Island, there is like the navel of the world, right? It's
Right.
stone, it's a
Mhm.
sphere, a stone sphere. And it was believed to be the navel of the world through which all of mankind was birthed. Well, in Bonaire, we have a stone called the Mother Stone. It's a huge monolith outcrop of limestone facing the ocean. And in the center of it is an indentation where a human could actually sit in it in the fetal position.
Okay.
And it's called the Mother Stone because it's believed that's where the giants were birthed from. So that there was an umbilical cord that ran from the navel of the stone all the way into the center of the earth, and it was connected to the mother, and the mother was in the center of the earth. And this mother, which is essentially a life force, not necessarily human,
Mm.
birthed these giants through this umbilical cord, and the giants came out through this navel in this monolith of stone. So here in Bonaire, we have this mother stone, this birthing stone, essentially the stone where the giants came from, and then in Easter Island, the same thing. Another stone that's believed to be the navel of the world, where all the people came from. What is this connection with stones and birth and stones and giants? I mean, were they born of stone? It's just unbelievable. The stones are the vessels through which the
Right.
giants are birthed. It's just fascinating.
Well, it seems to me it echoes the cave phenomenon, right? So,
Yes.
that's one thing you hit on was the cave. So if you've got giants coming from under the earth, Alabama here, I was just having a conversation last night with a friend talking about the stuff I found in North Alabama, and they just go, by the way, you know about all the caves, right? Littered with caves. Why were the giants in the caves? As humans, we think of, oh, we had to go in a cave to survive something, right?
Mm.
Okay, well, we know this DNA, whatever these tall things were, survived the cataclysm, right? Whatever
Mm.
philosophy or story you listen to, the cataclysm was sent to destroy many things, not only the way man was walking on the earth, at least these larger, Atlantean civilizations, but also, according to many traditions, to get rid of this large scale DNA, right? So how did any of this large scale DNA survive? It went underground, it went in caves. So when we see them coming out from under the ground and bringing with them like
That's the birth
isosceles
canal.
triangles, exactly, they were, if they were antediluvian, pre-catastrophe, they were full of knowledge. They
Mm.
had knowledge about all kinds of shit. That's why part of why they were getting wiped out, right? Not only did they have to eat people at a certain point to keep this massive frame going, they couldn't keep just the protein coming in, right? but many other reasons. So what do? They go underground, they survive. Cataclysm ends, they come out. Now, the humans that are thriving, what do they see? They see these giants coming out from caves under the ground, or centering themselves, or perhaps keeping the one that birthed underground safe where she couldn't be damaged. It all makes perfect sense because we know that if these things got here, they survived that cataclysm. And the only way they did that was underground.
Yeah.
And as far as that being subs for Atlantis, yeah, look, Atlantis was global, right? And if this global thing got shattered, and if sea levels, I'm sure wherever you are in Aruba, right, the sea levels were the same as they were over here, they rose dramatically, right? So these places were naturally large hubs. If what I found here in Alabama, the size and the scope of the stuff that was here, it wouldn't exist just here. I think it probably stretches all the way out to the other side of America, minus the flood coming through here and wiping it all out. And so naturally, it would have stretched all the way to where you are. And then the rocks. Why the rocks? Because we've got megaliths everywhere that normal humans can't explain, whether they're dolmens, or just strange, heavy stones balanced in weird ways. You see that echoed everywhere too. You have these tales of giants, you have these caves, and then you have these strange rock formations that it would seem only large humans or humans with some sort of technology we can't wrap our heads around could possibly achieve. So those are the three connections I see everywhere. The stones, like you say, the stones, the large scale DNA, and the caves.
Just to touch on the sea level portion. So the geological evidence shows that Aruba, Bonaire, and Curaçao were once one island, and they were separated by a series of 3 mega tsunamis. And this is based off of material that's found. And this flood that occurred here, the 3 consecutive floods that occurred coming from the east to the west. So on the side of the island where it was coming from, you can see debris from the other island. So that's how they pieced it together. Also, there's a lot of evidence underwater. There was, I don't know if I'm sure you've heard of the Natalie Holloway case, and there was a lot of diving going on looking for her body. And what they came across were a lot of giant skeletons. I mean, elongated skulls. I have photos of them. They found them in the ground. Now, the archaeologists told them to just leave them there. So, which is even more
Wild.
astounding. Yeah, because why?
Yeah.
Why would you I mean, obviously everyone knows where they are now. And you could see in the news reports, people took pictures with their cameras and they were all elongated skulls and they were amongst giant boulders. So I was thinking, well, then a lot of this evidence is under the water. And the head of archaeology here at the museum, he has just been named the archaeologist of the maritime waters of Aruba. So now the archaeologists have complete jurisdiction over any ancient history that is submerged, which is a recent development and quite intriguing. So I think a lot of the evidence is under the water. And friends, we have an invasive species of fish here that's really destroying our reefs called the lionfish. And they can only be hunted from people who free dive or use tanks using spear guns. So these guys go deep. And they have GoPros and they film everything. And there's YouTube channels and you can check them out. And so I watch them all the time because I'm not interested in what they're fishing for. I want to see what
See
they
what's on the
see.
seabed. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And they have gone through in one particular side of the island where there was. So Jason's mentioning like how far did these megaliths go? Well, I think, for example, Io Rock Formation, these megaliths went way out past the ocean and they're now submerged. And this lionfish hunter went in that area and was looking for lionfish. And it was all stones, all giant boulders, just like we see at the rock formation that's above ground. So I know that that's part of these cataclysmic events. So we also have seismic events. We are since I've lived here now 3 years, we've had several tsunami warnings. So we're in a very active tectonic plate area. So there's a lot of activity going on, but I know a lot of that is under the water. And yeah, I don't dive. I don't even know how to swim. So I don't know if I could ever make it. And it's really scary dives. I mean, there's sharks, there's tiger sharks. I mean, it's just crazy. And I don't have the constitution for it. But I'm thankful that these guys do go down and film this stuff, because all the time I'm thinking, my gosh, this is exactly what I'm talking about. I actually presented some of the footage from the lionfish hunters to the archaeologists here at the museum, and they just all took notes, and I don't know what they did with the information, but probably went down there and looked for things and then, put them back in their basement. But
Right.
it's a shame, but I think that the same concept, there was a cataclysmic event that caused one island to become three islands, probably around the time of, well, they say 3,500 BC. So that's their evidence. Where they get that number from, I have no idea. So, but that's in the geological report.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense to me. I like that. I'm collecting side quests while you're speaking. Yeah, so I definitely want to look into when the island was like it all together, and then even before, and the idea, because I visit Cuba quite often and talk to people about what is found in Cuba, because I think Cuba in particular is a difficult place to get any information out of accurately. And I would even go so far as to say that not a lot of archaeological work is done in Cuba compared to other places. It's probably not their main focus. So yeah, you telling me that your three islands used to be all one is very interesting.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up Cuba, because in the archaeological report, it is noted that the giants had two breakaway civilizations,
Hmm.
and they found evidence of this. And they were able to connect the two civilizations to here in Aruba because of the burials and the skeletal remains, the elongated skull and the giant bones. Those two breakaway civilizations, one is in on the border of Colombia and Venezuela, deep in the Amazon rainforest, and the other one is in Cuba. And I know exactly the caves. And they found these burials in these three caves in Cuba. And so, as a U.S. passport holder, I can't go to Cuba, but I would love to go to Cuba to see these caves. But then again, like you said, are they being preserved? I mean, they knew this back, that archaeological report, I believe, was in 1978. So they knew that back then. So yeah, and I'm sure the people of Cuba knew it as well. There's a series of three caves on one of their islands. And, Cuba's made up of a series of islands. And on one of the islands is extensive cave systems. And in there, they found the exact same people. Now, did DNA evidence prove it? I have not seen evidence of that, but based off of the burials being in isosceles triangles and the giant stature of the people and the elongated skulls, they connected it to the people here in Aruba, Bonaire, and Curaçao. So it's interesting you bring up Cuba.
It is interesting.
Jacqueline,
Yes, dear.
do you know what time it is?
Oh, I think so. Now that you've reminded me. Tell the people, Sarah.
It is time for a universal truth.
Mm.
For everyone who watches our show, you'll be familiar. We do universal truths. We try to collect one from each of our guests, just something that has helped them on their journey at some point that they would like to share with the world, a piece of wisdom. So, Heather, do you have a piece of universal wisdom for us today?
I do. I was thinking about it. I could make it about the Giants, but I don't want to make it that specific. I came up with this as I was parenting my daughter as a single parent, so which is very difficult. Just being a parent's difficult, and
Right.
then being a
Right.
single parent's difficult. And then for myself, and now I pass it along to my daughter, and I actually use it in both ways. So, and I can explain. So my universal truth is, if you make it a big deal, it becomes a big deal. And so, for example, when I owned my tour company here, so I using it in both ways, meaning, so if like if my daughter did something wrong, but it wasn't really a big deal, or I wanted to just have her ignore a situation or divert her attention, then you kind of do that. But if you start going on and ranting and going crazy, then all of a sudden something that's small and insignificant becomes a big deal, whether that's in a relationship or. But also, if you look at P.T. Barnum, right, The Art of Money Getting, he was a master marketer. And I used his concept of money getting in the sense of my tour company, my first tour company. And one of my advertising points was, we have all native Aruban tour guides, which was partially true, but I didn't even know if anyone else had native Aruban tour guide. I didn't know anything, but I just thought, hey, it's cool. It sounds cool. These are actual Arubans. They're not from Venezuela. They're not from Colombia. They're not from the Netherlands. They're Arubans, and they're going to show you their island. And then I saw that other tour companies started copying my tour point, my tagline, So I thought, wow. So I made it a big deal, and it wasn't even anything. And then it became a big deal, So it can go both ways. So I think that's my universal truth to share with you, because I think it can go both ways. It's kind of interesting, and it's good advice.
It is good advice.
It is. I love that. I use that all the time. I have a daughter as well.
Oh, nice.
Definitely can relate to that. If you make it a big deal, it becomes one. And
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
That's
we use
totally
that a lot around
solid.
here.
Tell my kids all the time, if you don't tell them, they didn't notice. Just, that's the way you play most things in life,
Yeah.
right? Don't
Exactly.
point it out. It's not
Yeah.
that big a deal.
That's
Yeah.
right.
I think that's a great point.
It is a good point.
So
Um,
I have a general question. I was just going to throw Heather's way, that comes to mind. Why is it so much of my work, right, doesn't, I've got the giant lineage, all definitely going on with the Tuscaloosa stuff, but then even the rocks, though that's not, in any way sort of pointing towards giants, it's pointing towards antediluvian society. But so I'm sure you probably encounter some of the same things when it comes to these topics, particularly giants. You just throw that word out there. Humans, not just mainstream, right? We're not talking just mainstream archaeology. We well have talked about the limits that go on in that fucking circus of non-science, to be clear on my position. But what is it that in just humanity in general, why do you get a knee-jerk reaction, or do you for the most part, when you start throwing out, hey, giants, just in general in evidence? Everybody sort of balks. It's either woo or, they want, nothing to do with it. When I think about it, I think every tradition, if you're a faith, if you believe in God and the Bible, you have a tradition of giants right there. Even if
mm,
you're New Age and you say read Enoch, you have a tradition of giants right there. I have firsthand accounts from these Spaniards. You have Vespucci, right? Firsthand accounts of people that saw these things, wrote it down. So if humanity is so well equipped, why do we see this knee jerk when it comes to this topic of giant, human beings?
So, people used to will ask me that, and the people used to say, "Oh, do you think it's Darwinism?"
mm,
I don't know why something like Darwin is some sort of sweetheart. We have to protect him and his views, which were not correct. So people say, "Oh, because we subscribe to Darwinism, and this would be that humans were devolving instead of evolving." But Darwin, if you read his work, and I have, he subscribes to giants. He actually visited Patagonia. He interacted with giants, and he writes extensively about how there has to be more research on how there are giants existing among us, and how there are average statured humans and then these giants, and he was intrigued by it. So it's definitely not protecting Darwinism, because Darwin subscribed to giants. So I really think, and you touched upon it a little, Jason, that I think if you admit there are giants, you have to admit that the Bible is real, right? So you have to admit that a lot of this folklore lore is reality. And particularly that's as it pertains to the Old Testament. You have to, if you're saying there were giants, then the whole Bible is true. So, or at least the Old Testament, when the New Testament essentially came from the Old Testament. But so that's what I think. I think there's a concerted effort to make it so that to go out of people going out of their way to control a narrative to make sure that religion is not proved to be not folklore and just faith and fantastical, but actually based in reality and in science, in a sense, because there were giants. I mean, over and over again in the Bible, they're mentioning giants.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So that's what I kind of think is going on. Also, maybe the dark forces that are on this planet with us think that they are part of the giants, think that that's their lineage, particularly if you're going to talk about the Nephilim. And when you, for example,
Hmm.
hear about some of these skulls showing up in Rosicrucian ceremonies or Freemason ceremonies. Now,
Hmm.
here in Aruba, we have 6 Temple of the Sun Masonic temples, which are 33rd degree and above Masons. We have my ex-boyfriend, who's the head of the Archaeology Museum, is also the head of the Rosicrucian Society here in Aruba. So the Rosicrucians are the
Wow.
gatekeepers of all knowledge as far as it contains, particularly to science. They believe that they need to keep the secrets, as Jason has mentioned earlier, and that's a power play for them. If you hear about these skulls showing up in ceremonies, people drinking out of them, etc. So there's this dark forces. I think in my opinion, they think that they are part of this lineage of giants and that the giants were nefarious. So I think we have kind of the same coin, but two sides of it. That, saying that the giants existed means that the Bible, in particular the Bible, I speak of that just because I'm more familiar with that than the other holy
Hmm.
books. But even, the ancient Hindu stories, all speak of giants,
Mhm.
ancient Egypt giants, etc. So that would mean that they would have to admit that those stories are not stories, but actual accounts. And then further, that maybe the nefarious actors of this planet, these dark forces, believe that that's their lineage and they want to keep that sacred and to themselves as a power play. That's what I think, because I don't think it has anything to do with Darwin. I think Darwin is being used as a cover, but
Sure.
I don't, it wouldn't make sense because Darwin did interact with giants actually, so, and found it to be fascinating and worthy of further research.
And there's probably other truths that we're not even considering that if you were to pull that giant string, a bunch of other things would come out with it,
Mhm.
and
That's
all
it.
of it would be just laying there on the table. So, I mean, there's no telling why, but you can only just imagine, all these things are interconnected in such a way that they can't give us that without giving us some other pieces to the puzzle that we don't need those pieces. So,
Good
I mean,
point.
it's just mind-boggling to think about what else is attached to that in
Right.
the cover-up because we know it's a cover-up at this point.
Yeah.
I think we wouldn't all four be sitting here if we didn't
Right.
think there was a cover-up going on.
Yeah.
I
So,
think
yeah,
you
that's fascinating.
you hit on it with the nefarious forces. So look, I think personally that the Matrix, right? This current culture trap we are all in this current epoch of time, right? Where good is evil, evil is bad, and you all turn on X, okay? This world we currently live in, it is built upon the predicated notion that we are currently at the height of humanity's achievements on this earth, right?
Mm.
The only way I buy into everything shoved to me on this cell phone in my movie theaters, by my doctors, by the leaders, the only way I accept all of that is if I accept that we are, like they say, at the highest iteration of humanity. This is as good as we can do. This is science, baby. We're curing the patients. We're also what? We're killing the babies, you know. It's all a lie. And as soon as we take on board that we had a much greater epoch of time, when we start looking at these megalithic constructions, these mountains that seem melted, these giants you're finding in Aruba, we then have before us concrete reality, like you said, that not only is the Bible, right, the story of God as we understand it, real, but that this little iteration we're in is the shit one, right? That humanity
Yep.
was once at a much higher point. So we then are face to face with the fact that these liars who are leading this shit iteration of humanity are full of crap. And we all now can then take our power back. See, I think that not only does just the story of our past fall when you pull that thread, but everything they've been trying to shove us falls when you pull that thread. They're, like you said, exposed, thinking they have a lineage back to these Nephilim, right? What
Mm.
would a religious or even a whatever anybody that understands spiritual realities call a disembodied entity that traveled around, right? You'd call it a demon, you'd call it this. Well, what were the Nephilim, these giant things that were destroyed? They weren't sent anywhere. They were banished to this place. So when those bodies they inhabited were gone, what happened? You have a disembodied spirit. So yeah, when you start pulling these threads, there's all kinds of ways it goes. But I'll cut off with the biggest one that happens is their illusion falls. And we
Mm.
can all see that this is crap you're selling us. We've done much better on this planet, and we can take back our right to try to do it again now.
Yes, good point. I agree.
Did anyone have any more questions for Miss Heather? Chaplain?
I do. Um, your book is not
Certainly.
out just yet, is it?
Right. No, it's not.
Okay.
So I'm hopeful to get it out soon. Because what happened was I had the book almost finished, but then I realized I kept learning more information. And now that I found out, I found a petroglyph. So now I think I'm ready to fully present the work, in that I think I found a connection between the giants and the later period Kakateo, who was the native population who came from northern Venezuela to inhabit Aruba, contemporaneous with the giants.
Mm.
That they have now morphed. That ancient tribe of Kakateo have become part of a tribe that now still exists in Venezuela and Colombia. There's about 1 million tribes member in existence, and they have a complex ritual of death. And I believe this complex ritual of death was passed down to them from the giants. So, and there's a petroglyph panel in the national park, actually, that's totally off limits. They don't even have a path there. So it's just, so they're trying to keep this place
Mm.
secluded and off the maps, literally. That is
Naturally.
of a diagram of the description of the path of souls, basically giving the instruction about how to die and how to go into the heavens. And the heavens were entered through the constellation of Orion.
I am
So I
shocked.
believe, yeah,
Right?
exactly.
Like in
Exactly.
Egypt, like at Moundville in Alabama.
Wow.
Yeah,
Exactly,
Wow.
of course.
exactly. So that, I think, really, because I came up with once I moved here and could
Mhm.
see where the burial was, and how that cemetery was mostly always submerged.
Yes.
How could they bury the people? How could they put the ochre on the skulls? Where did the flesh go? And all these other questions, that kind of answers a lot of it. And that's after I saw that there must have been a complex ritual of death, that maybe even death was more important than life itself. And then connecting it to this modern tribe and their rituals. And also, we have a lot of female iconography on these islands. We
Mm.
have a monolith in Bonaire also called the Mother Stone. She is a giant limestone monolith carved into a female form eons ago, with a veil on. The birthing chamber in the caves, right by my home. There is a female painted in red ochre. She has a veil, and the baby is in her womb, and there are cupules cut out for her belly button, her eye. Um, there is another statue in the rock formation called Io here. It's been toppled, but it is of a female, and she's pregnant, and she has her belly button, and she has a veil. So this whole concept of women with veils, and this tribe, the modern tribe here in Venezuela and Colombia, they all, for ceremonies, the women wear veils. And it's just so intriguing. How can you not make that connection?
Mhm.
And they don't even have any idea why they wear veils. They have no idea. But they have to for birth, for fertility rituals, and
Mhm.
it's the women. The focus is on the women always in these rituals, marriage, these coming of age ceremonies that the women go through. They're always with these veils, and to see the iconography on these islands of these female representations with veils as well. So making that connection, really, and knowing that this modern tribe that still exists, thank goodness, is 1 million people strong, is still carrying on these ancient traditions, and they have
Yeah.
no idea what and how they talk about the path of souls. They talk about how you have a soul here on earth, and then you get a new soul once you're in your state of death, that but you're not really in death, it's just another part of your life. And then to see, we have a petroglyph called the twins, which I believe depicts the two souls, the soul of the living and the soul of the dead, and then making those connections, because I think the way to understand the giants here in Aruba particularly is through their death rituals,
For
and
sure.
not through particularly their life.
For
So
sure.
now I feel more confident in the ability to make the conclusions necessary. I mean, we already know what happened pretty much. I conclude what happened to the giants, and that's through the genetic evidence showing that they pretty much bred themselves out when they saw that they weren't having a lot of baby giants, and there were more and more people invading the island. And
Mm.
I think eventually they sort of just, became mixed into the people, because I think, as I've explained in my other shows, I don't know if did it when I was with you guys, but that there was a DNA report done in 2002 of the Aruban population, and particularly there were really no slavery here in Aruba, because it's
Mm.
a desert island, so there's
Mhm.
not a lot of ability to do plantations, etc.
Right,
So
which is
a lot of
unusual for the Dutch.
Right, and unusual for the Caribbean as a
Yes.
whole too, to have an intact population of mostly indigenous people. And so when they did this DNA testing, they found out that there was this ancient DNA that was not attached to any modern DNA that they could find, and it was the conclusion of the investigators that this was the archaic DNA from the archaic people who lived on the island, who were the giants. So I think that through that the fact that they were bred out, but yet they're so then you have to look at the fact that they had to, through their complex ritual of death, is how they maintained their life, and how they passed on this complex ritual of death to even being living and going on today, to the fact that these women are still wearing veils, which I find the most fascinating part of it. So yeah, so I think that's essentially, once I finish the book, then that will be the conclusion about what's occurring. And yeah, and it makes more sense. And it makes more sense because I'm so thankful, because that was my goal, to try to find out, are there people today who are
Yes.
carrying on the traditions of the giants and we just don't know it? And then after my research, and again, that's how I always say, like, now I've been researching these giants like almost 20 years. I've been researching these guys, and every time I think, okay, I got it all the information here. And then something else will come across. And it's so fascinating. I feel so lucky, that it's the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah.
It could be torturous at
Yeah.
times too, because you really just want to put a little bow on it and then say, okay, everything's done. But now that I have this further information, I'll be printing the book, and just adding these new chapters, because most of it is written. So I look forward to presenting that the next time I'm on with you.
Absolutely, we'll definitely have you. I wonder,
Thank
I have a little thought, just because I was a palliative nurse for many years and did a
Yeah.
lot of reading about death and death ritual and um, transition from life to death. I wonder if that your cemetery that's underwater, if the 2 months of the year, what 2 months of the year is it actually accessible? Because I wonder what the astronomical alignments are at that time of the year. I would
Oh,
be
that's
interested
very
in
good.
knowing that. Yeah.
Yeah. So right now it's dry. So our rainy season is just begun. So as a matter of fact, we just got rain last night. So that's a big deal because we're a
Mhm.
desert island, literally a
Mhm.
desert island. So we don't get a lot of rain. So most of the month of September, it's
Mhm.
the driest. The driest month of the lake bed is September. So
Okay.
that would, I assume, be the month that they would and the middle of August. So the middle, maybe a six week period of burying the dead. And it reminds me also of the Windover site in Florida. You know how they were also buried in the water, and
Yeah.
this concept of burials in water, I never even thought of that before, heard of that before, until I realized that about the Windover site and how there are connections in terms of the type of burials between these people of Florida, these ancient people of Florida who have Asian DNA. And not Native American DNA, although NAGPRA has made it so that the entire site is taken over by the Native Americans. That there's a connection between these underwater burials, and they're kind of contemporaneous with the ancient people of Aruba who also bury their people underwater. So
Mhm.
Hmm.
I find that intriguing. So yeah, it's another aspect to delve into.
Another
It
side
never
quest.
ends.
Yeah.
The plot thickens.
The plot
Yes.
does thicken. Well, Heather, I loved this conversation. I could probably sit here and shoot you little
I
questions
know.
all day. Really, really, really appreciate you coming on. And I'm looking forward to that book. I searched everywhere. I'm like, is it out there? Does she write it?
No, yes, no, sorry. No, but I will be broadcasting it everywhere on my social media as soon
Good,
as it's out
good,
for sure.
good. Yeah, I definitely look forward to
Can't
that.
wait to read it.
Yeah. And Shaman, thank you so much for coming on
Yeah.
and providing backup.
Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you guys for the opportunity. Like I said, Heather, I know we've just chatted briefly on X about how the overlapping aspects of what we do. And look, you hit on it. Archaeologists and the mainstream, they've got their clicks, they protect their thing, they don't believe in
Mm,
taking in the outside information. So the advantage to us is we do this, right? And that we all
mhm,
do connect and we make sure we're pointing out the patterns of, what we're seeing where. Because even though you're on a desert island and I'm in some tropical rainforest, called Alabama, when you look at the map, I mean, this would have been the territory of any half globe spanning civilization. And so we're all just mapping it out independently on our own. So I thank you for what
mhm.
you're doing. I look forward to digging into it more. And this was great, guys. Thank you for the opportunity to jump in.
Yeah, for sure. I was looking forward to this one for a long time.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
Giants. It always goes back to giants.
mhm.
That's what
it
I've been
does.
saying.
It
The
does.
Crescent Mound at Mobilla. I'm telling you, it's Tuscaloosa's
Yes.
son. And you mentioned the
Yeah.
water burial. Funny enough, that mound has the water designed into the to flow in when the water's high, so that this crescent mound is filled with a bowl of water. You know.
There's
Wow.
So
definitely something to the water burial thing because I think
yeah.
if you I'm gonna look into it more. I'll get back to you, Shaman.
Right. Let's
There's a
do it.
pattern there, though, for
Mm.
sure.
Well, it would if you're an ancient person and you're seeing this lake bed that is only accessible, a couple months of the year, that becomes more of a sacred space. You know what I mean? It becomes more desired, like, you only have a certain window, and so, of course, a whole ritual would develop around the time frame, and, if you just
Absolutely.
die outside of the time frame, then they've got rituals that get you prepared for your delivery when they can reaccess the lake bed. Like it just, anything that is scarce obviously becomes something that's very special and sought after. So yeah, I just fascinates me that idea. So another side quest. I've got so much reading to do in my life. You have no idea.
Me
Girl.
too.
Yeah. So thank you again, Heather, Sarah, and I really, really appreciate it. Shaman, as usual, we appreciate you and all the work that you do with us and the Institute for Natural Philosophy. Sarah, where can the people find Universe Unveiled?
We can be found anywhere that you get podcasts. We're on YouTube, Spotify, Rumble, Spreaker, Insta, X, and Facebook.
Ooh, she's been practicing.
We also, yeah, I wrote it down and I'm reading it off of paper. Also, be sure to check out our merch shop, link in description below. We have new episodes every other Wednesday, and we do news updates every Sunday at 11:11. So be sure to check that out.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everybody. And everyone have
Is
a
the
great
flip-flop
day.
cannon in the merch shop yet? We gotta
We're going
hurry
to
up and
get
figure
one
out how
just
to
for
We're
you.
having one
flip-flop
developed.
cannon.
It's in
You can
development.
buy flip-flops with
We're gonna
Universe
copyright
Unveiled
it.
logo on them.
Like a bazooka.
Yeah.
Shoot it at all the mainstream attacking us. It's got
Yeah.
many
Yeah,
uses.
there we go.
That's so funny. All right. Thank you, everyone. Heather, have a great day. And thanks so much for coming to talk with us. We loved it.
Thank you.
Enjoyed
it was
it,
a
Heather.
pleasure.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Heather.
Bye.
Speak soon.